So there was a handover, and I then submitted to her a written report that, to the best of my knowledge, gave her indicators of matters where, if she needed questions to be answered by me, that would be a map she would use to ask questions from me. Unfortunately, that did not happen.
I only have 2 more questions, Chair. Advocate, finally, my last 2 questions. This one has to do with funding. The role of an executive is to address the issue of funding. With the Nkandla judgment, the Scorpions disbanding, there were increased workload on the public protector. What sources of support or funding existed aside from the South African fiscus, and what were the advantages and disadvantages of using these sources?
Thank you, Honorable Suka. There were no other funds other than from the South African fiscus, and I welcome this opportunity because there's often been a public campaign that says that I received donor funds from USAID. No, USAID gives its donor funds to Treasury, and then Treasury distributes those funds to departments, and we used to get our budget from the Department of Justice. And of course, through persuading USAID, we got that kind of funding through the Department of Justice. That was for the case management system. So no money ever exchanged hands between the public protector and any donor outside the Treasury of the Republic of South Africa. Then there was pro bono assistance. The question was asked about leadership. When I first came in as a public protector, I had a clear mind that I wanted rigor balanced with promptitude. And because of the original nature of the institution, I felt there was a lot of emphasis on speed and not rigor, and that those who were rewarded for speed. I gave an example yesterday of KZN closing a whole lot of files because government had either said we didn't do it, or government had said we don't have the answers. And then, of course, they would be rewarded for the number of cases they had closed. And I didn't think it was right. But by insisting on how things should be done, it became clear to me that my team was not following, because leadership is influencing and inspiring others to think and act as required to achieve desired results. So I felt that the body language was suggesting that they didn't like the fact that I decided that then nobody's going to get a bonus until we fix the system. And with the advice of a total stranger who had managed under transitional circumstances, he just told me that if you want to go far, go together, but if you want to go fast, you can go alone. So that's the leader who then assisted us with pro bono facilitation of an exercise that led to understanding what really was our purpose as a public protector, which was really to achieve justice. And therefore, finishing a case when you have reinforced injustice is worse than not doing the case at all. And in the end, then we are on the same page through pro bono facilitation.
Thank you, Honorable Sukas. Thank you, Advocate Madonsela. Honorable Heron.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Advocate Madonsela. Chair, I don't know if these questions were covered. I was struggling to get in the first hour of the meeting, but I really want to just ask some questions that I made Advocate or Professor Madonsela around the Vrede Dairy investigation. We've had quite a lot of evidence presented to the committee around that investigation. And if I may just, the gist of it was that Advocate Cilliers, who was doing the investigation in the provincial office, drafted several versions of a report where she did not find or implicate, or did not find any evidence or any reason to implicate politicians. And there was evidence from Mr. Samuel that you were not happy with the leaving out of politicians in the report. Then yesterday, I think in your evidence, you indicated that you had had tea with Premier Magashule, and he had indicated to you that then MEC Zwane was implicated or could have been implicated. So I'm trying to understand, was that the reason why you requested Mr. Samuel to take over the investigation and then to investigate the politicians that had come out of that tea with the former Premier?
Good morning, Honorable Heron, and thank you for your question. Firstly, I just want to say, no, that was not the basis for saying politicians should be investigated. In one of the early versions of Advocate Cilliers' report, there had been an indication that one of the officials had said, ask the Premier. It was the Premier who was behind this process. It is in writing. I've asked now that the Pub Protector, and maybe I asked through one of the spokesperson at the Pub Protector for think tank minutes that deal with the Vrede Dairy matter, and I was asked that I must ask formally through the evidence leaders, and therefore making that request to the evidence leaders to please ask for think tank minutes on the Vrede Dairy matter and copies of reports submitted by the team to the think tank on this matter. So it's not that the politicians enter the stage very late after meeting Premier Magashule. There had been probably the very first draft that served at the think tank had mentioned the involvement of Premier Magashule. And then when I met him, he didn't say MEC Zwane is implicated. He said MEC Zwane was at the center of this. He has all the answers. So he didn't say he's implicated. He said he was the person behind the project.
Thank you, Professor. The committee's heard that there were several drafts of this report that were prepared by Advocate Cilliers, where she continuously kept the scope focused on the administration rather than the politicians, and that it was you that were unhappy with these drafts and requested Mr. Samuels ultimately to take over the investigation. But it seems that, and it's a pity we don't have Advocate Cilliers here, but it seemed that she was not able to find a basis for investigating the politicians, and it was really on your instruction that that she or Mr. Samuel included the politicians. So if she was following the evidence that she had, how was she? I mean, how did your intervention assist us to determine whether the final draft of this report is an act of misconduct, when the initial investigator, Advocate Cilliers, continuously drafted a report that did not include the politicians? And it was really, if I understand the evidence we've had so far, on your insistence that politicians were included.
Firstly, it is not true that the first time politicians were mentioned was at my insistence. As I've indicated, Premier Magashule was mentioned in the very first draft that served at the think tank. Secondly, the one version that was sent back that was now at the level of what she was presenting as a provisional report, or for consideration as a provisional report. It wasn't sent back because politicians were not mentioned. It was sent back because nobody was mentioned. It would say officials did this, literally nobody, whether official or politician. It had no names. The actors who did the wrong things did not have names or faces. So, but you write that in the absence of evidence that implicated the politicians, there would be no basis to drag the politicians into the arena. However, Honorable Heron, the Mail and Guardian case was about the failure to take into account what was in the public domain through the media. And the public protector was found to be at fault for ignoring the Mail and Guardian, which had broken the story and which had some information. So the standard operating protocol that was operational at the time was that any source of information must be followed. And in the public domain, politicians were already implicated. If we ask ENCA right now, they will give you a clip where one of the beneficiaries, an older person, was lamenting how they were brought into the scheme with the promises of hope out of poverty, how they had a meeting at the George Hotel in Pretoria and with politicians and others, and they were brought into the scheme, but it brought them nothing but pain. So we were not going to ignore what was in the public domain because it's about beginning and keeping an open mind as an investigator. You have to have an inquisitorial mind, and you have to have some healthy skepticism.
Thank you. If I may just wrap up then, Professor, I understand there was allegations in the public domain, and so that is a basis for including the political players in the investigation. Did you ever discuss with Advocate Cilliers why she continuously excluded the political players, so that you ultimately had to sort of remove the investigation from her and hand it to Mr. Samuels?
It was not removed from her because of excluding political players. It was removed from her for not having done a forensic investigation. It is in the standard operating protocol that when there are allegations of impropriety that involve conduct failure, in other words, it's not beyond service failure or maladministration, there is an alleged or suspicion of corrupt relationships, you must conduct a forensic. And that hadn't been done. I spent a whole day training the team in Bloemfontein on this. And after it had been going backwards and forward, and it was still not at the level of rigor that was required by our own standard operating protocol, I asked that Mr. Samuel take it over. And this was not a judgment on Advocate Cilliers. She was an ace performer on early resolution. She had been in charge of early resolution. And if you see the stats that are going to be submitted by the public protector, contrary to what was suggested yesterday, we did exceptionally. It might even be better, per capita because of star performers like Advocate Celia. But this was an investigation of a different nature, and we needed to comply with our standard operating protocol. But more importantly, the courts had already told us in the Mail and Guardian judgment what a proper investigation is.